Good day, gentlemen and ladies. Florida, how y'all doing tonight? Let me double check, make sure we're StreamYard says we're live, but I want to double check. Yes, we are live. Woohoo! Hope y'all having a good evening. I'm your host, Sean McFall. Uh, Ready. Nobody's chimed in yet, so we got quite a bit of events coming up this weekend. Hey, Talisa, how you doing this evening? Get straight into our program. This weekend, the 17th, Sergeant Roy Hudson, will be having a ride. If you're in the Florida Mechanized Cavalry, or if you have a motorcycle, you want to come join us this Saturday. It's a 3-hour ride. We'll be kickstands up at 10 a.m. Camp Holly is located 3 miles west of exit I-80 off of I-95. You be there too, Talisa? Sweet. So, there's information there. So, I'm sure Sergeant Hudson will have printouts uh, for everybody on the route that we're taking. Besides, yeah, that's coming up on the 17th. We have Victor Smith sent something in. Yes, if the page went a little crazy the last couple of days, it's because people were sending in news and events. I wanted to make sure you guys got up to date information. Backed by popular demand, the one, the only Dorit Simpson, Mrs. Simpson, will be back to do another fantastic program. I'm looking away from the camera, and yeah, we'll be doing. The topic is why the Civil War was just part of an siege against America, and how we are helping. Mark your calendars. October 11th. Doors open at 5. Presentation. Meeting begins at 6:15. Potluck meal. This event is free. Bring any friends that love American and Southern history. I know Victor did this, I believe last year. I got a report it was a fun event when Mrs. Simpson came down. So if I'm not doing anything on October 11th, I might come up. Hey, Victor, I was just talking about Mrs. Simpson and your event. November 26th. Mark your calendars. Leon Arthur's Christmas extravaganza is coming. We'll be at the VFW there in Arcadia. When I get times, uh, what time that they're opening the doors and starting food, I'll let you guys know. So mark your calendars, November 26th. Alrighty, we're gonna skip ahead. Saturday, January 7th at 6 p.m. Honored guest will be none other than Commander in Chief at Sons of Confederate Veterans, Jason Boshears. Camp J.J. Dickinson, Captain J.J. Dickinson Camp 1387, proud to announce the 2023 Florida premiere of the Lee Jackson Dinner and Southern Heritage Celebration. I'm going to this event. Uh, Roy assured me it is going to be a fun event. So then after that, the Kirby Smith Camp Lee Jackson Celebration Dinner Florida Division event Sunday, January 15th, 2023. You will be having a Lee Jackson dinner. Guest speaker will be our Commander-in-Chief, Jason Boshears. That will be at 5 p.m. Uh, the brochures and that the camps are sending me, I am posting that on the page. As you can tell, I got my Florida Division hat. Thank you, Calvin Hart, our division commander, for that. And yes, our Florida Division shirt. Yes, he does, Victor. He loves us. He loves everybody. So those are the upcoming Florida events. So stay tuned to the page as more come in because we're going into fall. So a lot of camps, a lot of brigades out there in regions are starting to plan events for this upcoming year. So it looks like it's going to be a fun year for us the next couple months. I know my region commanders waiting for it to get cool off. We're going to be installing headstones over South Florida. I think he said some are a little bit north of Tampa, but it's still South Florida. The way I look at it, I mean, correct me if I'm not wrong, but let's bring in our special guest. We got Jim Odell and Kim Cullars. They're going to be talking about the Confederate Navy. So please welcome them to the show.
Hey, good morning, everybody, or good
How
evening.
y'all doing this evening?
Good evening.
Hope everybody's having a great evening and stuff, and here to share time with our friend Sean and all of our compatriots all over Florida. And I believe who is that? Vinny's out there in Arkansas or something. I don't see him on yet.
Yeah, he's not on yet. He's in New Jersey.
New Jersey, okay.
But Jim, what's your camp name?
The camp name is Private George W. Thomas. He's a member of the 7th Florida. He went off to fight and everything, went all the way up and was there at the surrender with Robert E. Lee. And he moved down from Georgia into my hometown, and it was a cobbler here for the last 25 years of his life. And he's buried. He's the oldest living Confederate soldier that's buried in St. Lucie County, buried right next to his son up there in Riverview Cemetery. And he has a cross of honor that I put on his grave that was donated to the camp from one of our camp members. And it's a great privilege to have somebody that's seen so much and came back home as a veteran, moved down to my little hometown and basically started it rolling. I was told that from what I read, there was over 1,000 people at his funeral up there in Riverview Cemetery. It used to be called the Fort Pierce Cemetery, and 1,000 people there that were people that he made shoes for. Cool. Everybody's like, oh well, these people were traitors and this, that, and the other, and so disheartened. And here he was a simple cobbler. How humane and humble can you be making shoes for people, especially back in the day? And of course, my brigade is the 12th Brigade, Colonel Lang's Defenders. Don Young, when I first took over as brigade commander, he's like, well, does your brigade have a name? And I was like, 12th Brigade, I guess. So I called Wesley Frank, the previous commander. He's like, well, this 12th Brigade's all we ever did. So I said, you're calling him back? It's like, yes, sir, we do. Colonel Lang's Defenders, because Colonel Lang was the commander of the 8th Florida Brigade that fought all the way up to Gettysburg. And out of all the officers and men, I think there was 28 individuals from the 8th Florida that was present there at the surrender with Robert E. Lee. That's all that was left out of a couple of thousand men. So,
Kim, go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
I'm adjutant of the Private George W. Thomas camp in Fort Pierce. Jim Odell commanding. I've been in your camp for what, about 2 years now, 2.5,
Yeah, I believe so.
something
And
like
he's
that.
been a great asset to the camp with helping us with events and everything, and keeping us going and motivated. And he's quite an inspiring person after all the medical stuff he's been through, and come back and bouncing right along with the rest of us. And because he likes Navy too, is that's where our tie really binded together. And when I took over as adjutant for the camp under Wesley Frank, I went around. He wanted me to go collect dues for everybody, to send him out an email. I was like, no, I want to go meet these people because they never come to the camp meeting. They're like, how come you don't come to the camp meetings? Well, all we do is sit there and talk. And I was like, well, it's going to change. We're going to start doing stuff, because if we don't get George W. Thomas's name out into the public, he's just another sack of bones in the ground. As long as we can put flesh back on the bone, he still lives. He's still alive and breathing, and and a living legacy to what the Civil War was all about, the war between the states. Excuse me.
Well,
But
Sean, I actually live in Orlando, and I'm willing to drive 100 miles one way to attend their meetings and go to their events and things like that, because the George W. Thomas camp is very active and very proactive, and they further the charge, and that's what I'm looking for. So I don't
Good.
mind the drive.
That's the good part of the SCV is finding the camp that sort of meets your needs,
right.
and that you can grow and prosper within that camp. We have a lot of great camps throughout the division. You get the one you kind of fit in with.
And it's really amazing is that when you're talking about people like, well, your camp, you know
Mhm.
uh, the Sons of Confederate Veterans is not only national, it's international. My friend Ian Dewar is the president of the 290 Foundation in Liverpool, England, and his house and office are about 4 blocks away from Jonathan Laird's boatyard, where the CSS Alabama, which is one of Kim Cullars' premium things that he loves to talk about. He did a mind blowing talk there in Traverse that just blew me away, and I never knew really about the Alabama. I knew about what cause and effect of what happened, but he did a talk there at Traverse that was just unbelievable. And he's come to the camp before he was adjutant and done a talk about the Virginia and the Hunley and the David, the torpedo boat. And
Okay.
it's great to have people that love history. I have several people in my camp that, a lot of them are elderly and impaired at night driving and stuff, but they still contribute. Uh, and a lot of our guys are coming into our camp. It's all excited now. I have 4 new members coming into my camp, just
Sweet.
like, boom, all of a sudden. And Richard Halsey, who's on our gun crew for the cannon, and now he's going to be part of our ship's crew for doing our School of the Sailor and doing our ship and everything. He's going to be up there at his well, not his first reenactment. He did 3 reenactments so far as Powder Monkey for the cannon, and he's all excited because he's from Virginia. I mean, he's born and raised in Richmond, you
Right.
know, and the places that I yearn to see that they're just mind blowing. It's like, yeah, can you talk to people like from everywhere? They're like, well, yeah, I'm from Arizona. I was like, or a lady the other day, she's from Philadelphia. Have you ever been to Independence Hall? No. I was like, you live in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and you've never been to Independence Hall. I was like, that's just mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah, because down by me, we got a lot of rich history going back to the 19th century. We have the Crescent State Park. We have the Edison Ford Estates.
Oh yeah.
Uh, It's there. You just have to find it, or if you don't know about it, ask about it.
Yeah, the Ringling Museum of Art in St. Pete.
Yeah. Well, see, there's a story about that. That used to be their winter home where they
Oh, yeah,
did training and all that during the winter months before they went back on the road.
that's it.
But let's get to our topic about the Confederate Navy.
Ooh, yay!
I know there's some guys from the Tennessee division that will be popping on. Uh, that because I was telling them about you two coming on and talk about Confederate Navy. One guy said, "Man, he's ex-Navy," so he said I'd be joining the chat, but I haven't seen him chime in yet. But that's how the show goes. We get the current crowd right now, and most people start joining in about 8:30.
Yeah. Well,
So
one of the things I've been thinking about this ever since you mentioned it. Yeah, hey, can you come on and do Confederate Navy? And I was like, well, yeah. And thinking about it, there's a lot of similarities in the first War of Independence to the war between the states for the Navy specifically, because the Revolutionary War, they didn't have a Navy. They started out with nothing. And they were using letters of marque from the Continental Congress to help get merchant ships and fitting them with guns and everything and stuff until they could sit there and take on the British and everything. Similar with Secretary Mallory, they really had no Navy to speak of, and they started out by using merchantmen and stuff, blockade runners and everything else and stuff, and then developed the similar way of building the Navy and helping to make it stand up. And if you look at the Anaconda Plan, which Winfield Scott created, he was blockading all the ports all the way from Norfolk all the way around to Texas, the Gulf of Mexico, and the same thing with the British. They were blockading the ports. They were having to sneak stuff into the colonies, and then they landed troops and everything and stuff, and similar to Lincoln sentenced his 75,000 troops into South Carolina. There's a lot of similarities between both of them, and necessity is the mother of invention, and that, of course, is where our Navy comes from. Modern day with the Barnaby Pirates. So when you look at the whole picture of everything, that's how everything basically evolves. And basically, I'm concerning ourselves mainly with Florida for the most part, because that's my home state. And Florida was, after all the bells and whistles, was the third state to leave the Union. And everybody's like, wow, why is that? Well, we're 16 years old. You know how kids are. They don't want to be bossed around. So I think it was 67-2. They left the Union, and we basically started with making everything happen in Florida. Florida supplied the beef towards the end of the war, but I really didn't know that much about Natural Bridge until I started getting ready for this. And Natural Bridge was May 5th of 1865, just before Lee surrendered.
Yep.
And I'm just like, I thought it was earlier than that. I really didn't pay any attention to the timeline. But there's several books I've had for a while and stuff. Florida in the Civil War. It's a pictorial book and stuff. That's got, I'm a sailor, so pictures make a whole lot of world to me. And it's got quite a lot of good information on it. But when I started doing Navy, because I did Army when I first started doing reenacting, and I really didn't know that much about the Confederate Navy. I knew about the U.S. Navy because I've been on Battleship New Jersey and the Battleship Missouri and 6 other ships. So whenever we did visit ship, with dignitaries and everything, they always pulled me aside to give tours because of my knowledge and all the various parts of the ship and everything, I always ask questions. You can't learn if you don't ask questions. So I'd take them up to the signal shack and tell them about all the international code flags and, fire control and the missile systems and the whole 9 yards. But so I was over at the Hillsborough River Raid over in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And Archie, Jesse James Marshall, who's now one of my best friends. Most people say, yeah, I'll just Google it. Well, reenactors in the Seminole War and Civil War say, well, I'll just Archie it. So you send him a question, and a couple of days later, you get 5 pages back with information. And he's come to help us with the Battle of Loxahatchee, and he's an invaluable source. I mean, he's been reenacting since he was 8 years old, I think. And he was with the crew Spray at the Battle of Natural Bridge. And so they had the lifeboat that they rigged up with oars. And I'd read in a Navy officer's manual that I had from the 1830s about steering under oars, sailing under oars, and everything. So I asked Jesse, Archie, I was like, how can I get on that lifeboat out there and be a part of the crew, rowing? And he's like, Jim, my boy, the only way you're going to get to do that is you're going to have to be union to be on there. And I was like, well, I don't have a union flat hat. And he's like, well, it just so happens I have one back here in my office. So he goes back there. He's got a whole box of them, brings it out, hands me one, and says, and this is for you to keep so you could continue your service to history. And I was like, excellent. So I got out there, and they're like, hold water starboard, hold water port, and it was just so cool. I was actually performing this. Then Fritz had a skiff with a plank, and he'd come up alongside the barge canal bank, and we'd offload the Marines across the plank, across his skiff, up the bank with their mortar. They had a smaller mortar than the one that I now have, and go up there and do their firefight with the Confederates and everything, come back, and then we shove off and go out there like we're rowing out towards the ship. And it was a blast. And so later on, he says, Jim, my boy, if you really want to get involved doing Confederate Navy, the place you got to go is Natural Bridge, the CSS Spray. And I was like, the Spray? I was like, really? He's like, oh, yeah. So this is, I don't know if you can see it too well, but this is my board that I used for school day for years as the first class seaman and stuff, then bosun for the CSS Spray. And the CSS Spray, I call it the hero of Tallahassee because they Stars and Stripes and the Tacoma and a couple others tried to land troops there, and they fired on the troops in order to keep them from landing, and ended up in going up to Tallahassee and capturing Tallahassee. And during the fight at Natural Bridge, they had a crew of 20 of several they put on shore to go help with the Cradle and Grave Battalion and take care of the problem there. And that's one of my first ships I started doing. And everybody's like, hey, sailor, where's your ship at? And I was like, oh, it's right over there. You can't see it. I have it camouflaged. Most of the infantry guys would be like, giving you a hard time for being Navy. And Kim, he's been doing Navy for years, and he, like me, he really doesn't like being skirmisher. We like fulfilling the mission of the Navy because the Navy is one of the most important parts to help defend the coastlines and help with the blockade runners and help with the different events and stuff to keep the Confederacy alive and getting goods and foods to them and everything. And then one of the other ships that we started doing when we started trying to name a ship, we were going to do the America because it was Confederate and Union. And a couple of the guys says, well, no, we need to do something else. So they went to a book and found the CSS Kate Dale and the USS Dale. So we started doing that for whenever we need, like occupation of Palatka, which is a Union occupation. We do the USS Dale, which is this ship. I don't know if you can see it too well. These are all illustrations that I did and burned them in with wood burning. And of course, then there's her sister ship that we used for School of the Sailor that we came up with. And this is the CSS Cape Dale. And if you go up there to the Pioneer Museum in Dade City, Matt Stearman has an excellent display on both the Cape Dale and the Scottish Chief, which belonged to James Mackay. And originally, from all the writing I've read on either one of them, both of them, when the Union got tired of James Mackay's ship running the blockade, and they came in and shelled the city of what little bit of a city it was then of Tampa, and put troops ashore to go up there and find these two ships because they were tired of them running the blockade after he said, "I'll never do it again." And they supposedly caught him and fought the crew off, set them on fire, and burned them. Well, the Scottish Chief was a steam paddle wheeler, so they sit there and recovered it, took it upriver, and removed the parts from it and scuttled the rest of it. But I found out today when I was talking to my friend Jesse James Marshall that the Cape Dale was not burned all the way down to the waterline. It was recovered, repaired, and after the war, taken and used as the fishing sloop, the Josephine. And I was like, well, where's that information? Where can I find it? So he told me, but I didn't have anything to write it down with at the time. So when I see him in Loxahatchee, I'm going to get with him and clarify everything, because he's an amazing individual with knowledge. But the Confederate Navy, one of the greatest things that happened that they came across and did was when they captured Gosport Naval Yard in February of 1862. They captured the yard there and stuff, and the Union tried to burn everything, tried to destroy everything they had. And when they did that, they had the Merrimack, which is a steam sailing ship, state of the art almost. And they set that on fire and burned it. And when the engineers put all the fires out and got everything resolved, they found that it was only burned down to the engines. So they came out there and built the doghouse on top of it with armor plate. And there's a Turner Classic movie on YouTube called Ironclads, which is very, very, a little bit of Hollywood, but very, very accurate to what everything it does. And the neat thing about the Virginia was that she was a steam gunboat and a ram. The front end of it had like a beak on it where they could ram other ships and destroy them. But that's what Mr. Kim's going to talk about. The Gosport Naval Yard was one of the greatest things, because the only other dry dock facilities they had was in Pensacola, and they were smaller. They couldn't handle any big time ships or do any big boat buildings. Up in Dothan, Alabama, right across the Chattahoochee, going east in Jakin and Donaldsonville, there's a small naval yard there where they built small gunboats. And I went up there to deliver some help a friend move up there and stuff. And that was her hometown. And I seen the sign. I was like, wow, what's up with this? It's right next to your mom's trailer. And so her brother told me, he says, oh, yeah, we've gone over there. We found, back before they locked it down, we found belt buckles and buttons and all sorts of crazy stuff. He had part of a saber that had been in the ground and rotted away. And I was like, wow, what a great place to have a childhood right next to something like this. And I was like, that's just unbelievable. But the Navy and stuff was one of the primary forces that really helped extend the war as long as it could, providing support against the people there with in Vicksburg, especially, and Mobile. Kim does a great talk about his mine warfare. But 17 years in the Navy, I've always been just amazed at all the places I've been to all the way around the world, and realizing that it's not the first time our ships have been there. And when I was on the USS Rushmore, we landed in Somalia, and turns out the first USS Rushmore landed in Somalia back during the Barnary Pirates time frame. Landed there to suppress some of the pirate activities along the East African coast. And I was like, how ironic that the Rushmore landed there, and then our Rushmore comes back and lands there and puts my hovercraft and two other hovercrafts on the beach with the 15th MEU, and we offload 312,000 tons of rolling stock in 6 hours with hovercrafts. It's like, back then it would have took them, forever to offload that much cargo that quickly.
Alrighty, Jim. Let's give Kim a turn.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
You get me stuck in the Navy, man. You might as well sit back and watch.
Yeah, let me just expand a little bit on what Jim was bringing up. He was talking about how they started out with next to nothing. They literally had nothing. It was about February 21st of 1861. Those few states that had already seceded, they came together to make decisions on what the government was going to need to carry on their new nation. And one of the decisions they came to was to create Confederate Navy and Confederate Marine Corps. So it existed from February 21st, 1861 on, but really just only on paper. They had no boats, no ships, very little armaments. When they actually took over the Gosport Navy Yard, they had a lot of cannons that they seized, but most of those wound up going to the Army, the land forces. The first year and a half of the war, the government spent a little over $347 million, out of which only $14.5 million was for the Navy. So they had to compete against everybody else for what they wanted. And even when they were starting to build ironclads, they had trouble getting the iron for the ironclads because there was so many of the demands for it, for the Army, for railroads. Quite often they would have a shipment coming and it would be sidetracked by the Army, and they'd have to go seeking more sources after that. So a lot of the ironclads took longer than it should have to be built. And quite often some of them were 50% built, 75% built when the Union forces came through, and they had to scuttle the vessels before it was completed. When the Confederate forces took over the Gosport Navy Yard, they, like Jim said, they took the Merrimack, which had engines on it that they were able to salvage, and they decided to build an ironclad, which what was characteristic of the Confederate ironclads, you can tell from this drawing here, it looked like the roof of a barn floating down the river. It was at a pitched angle to help deflect shot, and they also greased them up, greased up the metal sides just to help deflect the shot. And that seemed to work pretty well. The Union Navy, they went in a different direction. They went with rotating turrets, which was an innovation that we still see today on battleships around the world. But when the Confederates first took over the Gosport Navy Yard, they also captured 2 steamers in Richmond, and they started to fortify shore batteries along the Potomac, Rappahannock, York, and the James Rivers. This greatly alarmed the Union forces, and the Union Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Welles, took immediate steps to purchase 136 vessels that had a total of 518 guns, and to begin construction on 52 more vessels, which would carry a total of 256 guns. Now, the Confederate Secretary of Navy, Stephen Mallory, he knew he couldn't compete with that. He had to think outside the box, innovate, and really advance marine architecture and Navy industry. That's why we saw so many innovations and so many firsts from the Navy. As Jim said earlier, there was ironclads around the world. Various countries were experimenting with them. Some of them were what they called ironclad batteries. They were not self-propelled. They would be towed to a place and anchored, and there would be a naval fortification. Some of them were self-propelled, but it was the Virginia that went down in history as the first armored battleship to sink an enemy vessel when it sank the Cumberland on March 8, 1863. The Confederacy also had a first of having the very first submarine to sink an enemy vessel when it sank the USS Housatonic. There were other submarines in existence before the Hunley, but it was the Hunley that went down in history as the first submarine to sink an enemy vessel. They came up with some other ideas, some that they did not follow through on, but yet we still see today something called mosquito fleets. Several small, highly maneuverable, lightly armed boats to work in conjunction with one another to harass and engage the enemy, strike and run, and strike and run. And they were called mosquito fleets, but they didn't actually follow through and take full advantage of that. But we see them come up later in the 20th century as the patrol torpedo boats. And even the English, they referred to their own boats as mosquito boats. So it was a good idea, but it just wasn't pressed.
Which it sounds like the PT boats during the Vietnam War.
Yeah, the PBRs in Vietnam, the PT boats, patrol torpedo boats of World War II, and the E-boats of Germany in World War II, mosquito boats of Britain in World War II. All of this came down through history. People were studying what the Confederates were doing and learning from it. And when they were, when Jim mentioned earlier about the letters of marque, what he was referring to is something done in the Revolutionary War and also the war to prevent Southern independence. A letter of marque was basically a certificate issued by the head of a nation to private citizens to give them license to purchase a ship, arm it, supply it, crew it, and strike out against the enemy. And any ships that they captured would be adjudicated in a prize court, and the material, the ship, cargo would be sold off to raise money, and the ship would, the crew of that conquering ship would receive the reward in monetary obligations, well, in payment. So it was prize courts, and there was also the blockade runners that was actually getting paid to bring in cargo. They were actually bringing in cargo all the way up into 1865, as each port was closed by the Union Navy. It got down to one last port in Wilmington, North Carolina, and the Confederates were still running in there as late as 1865. When the Virginia was tasked with going down to Hampton Roads, their mission was to clear Hampton Roads of the Federal fleet. They went down March 8th 1862, and they had a small flotilla with them of smaller vessels, consorts. They had the Beaufort, 1 gun, the Raleigh, 1 gun, the Patrick Henry, which you have a picture of that, 12 guns.
Patrick, yes, I do. There we go.
The Jamestown, 2 guns, and the gunboat Teaser, 1 gun. So there was a total of 27 Confederate guns going up against 300 Federal guns. But being outmatched never bothered the Navy. They were getting kind of used to that. The Virginia went out, sank the USS Cumberland, rammed it, and actually broke its prow, its ramming prow, off into the Cumberland. Actually, it ran the Minnesota, USS Minnesota, aground and set the USS Congress on fire. And some of the other vessels that it struck were, let's see. Well, they were down there about 4 hours in battle. And at the end, the USS Minnesota had run aground, and the Virginia was firing upon it, and Minnesota struck its colors, which means it lowered its ensign to signal to its opponent, "I surrender to you."
Yeah.
They were actually, the Virginia was trying, other consorts were trying to send sailors aboard the Minnesota to accept their surrender and take the ship, when the Union Army forces on shore actually started firing upon those ships, which was a violation of the maritime laws at the time, but it went on, it happened. So they never actually got to capture the Minnesota. It actually got to survive that day and was refloated the next day. Virginia had taken an awful lot of shells and strikes from the forts, from the Army, from the other Federal vessels, and it went back to its home port to get ready for the next day. And it came down the next day on March 9th, 1862, and that's when the Monitor showed up. And they had their epic battle where they fought for many more hours, and they went round and round in circles. The problem with the Virginia was it had a higher draft, which means it sank lower in the water than the Monitor. And it actually ran aground a few times, and they had to get themselves off because they were immobile once that happened. They actually were planning a boarding party. They were going to ram the Monitor and send a boarding party onto the deck of the Monitor and jam wooden planks underneath the turret to jam it so that it would no longer be able to be mobile. As they rammed the Monitor, they kind of rocked back and forth and kind of deflected off, so they were unable to board the Monitor. But they were actually planning a boarding party. They fought basically to a draw for the day, and they both resorted to their home ports to recondition their ships and make repairs and take care of their wounded. The next day, the Virginia came down to meet with the Monitor, and the Monitor would not come out. The other Federal ships had moved way far away from the area controlled by the Virginia. And even though the Virginia was trying to entice the Monitor to come out, it would not. So a lot of people say that it was a draw. I tend to look at it like, what was each vessel's mission? The mission of the USS Monitor was to get rid of the Virginia. It did not do that. The mission of the Virginia was to clear Hampton Roads. It did do that. So even though the two ships were evenly matched and it fought to a draw, in my mind, the Virginia was successful.
Yeah, buddy.
Jim was also alluding earlier to the torpedoes. If you've ever watched PT 109, the movie, or In Harm's Way, the movie, any of the old movies about World War II Navy, you get the idea that a torpedo was a self-propelled explosive device launched or deployed from a ship or a submarine. Well, back in the to prevent Southern independence, torpedoes were basically what today we would call a sea mine. It was not mobile. It was pretty much anchored to the bottom of a harbor or a river. Sean, you may have some photographs or drawings of the various torpedoes there.
There you go. We found the keg one.
Now that's a keg torpedo, which was one of the most common ones. They came in different sizes, all the way up to about 120 pounds of powder, from 40 pounds to about 120 pounds. And you can see the anchor there, the chain going to the bottom to anchor it so it stays in place. And you see it's anchored just below the surface of the water at low tide. The reason being is, as the ships would come upriver, it would be invisible, virtually invisible. You'll notice the two cones on the end. They didn't have those at first. That was something that they found out that they needed after they started experimenting with the kegs. They put those cones on there to make them hydrodynamically stable, so that as the tide went in and out, or the current of the stream passed over it, over the blunt butt of the keg, it wouldn't bounce it around. It would make it more stable. And if you look at that drawing, you'll see little nodules on the top. Those are the contact fuses. Those were designed, a pretty unique design. It was a glass tube with a chemical inside, and that glass tube was on inside of a brass shell tube with another chemical between the glass and the brass, so that if something heavy like a ship came up and bumped into it, it would bend the brass, break the glass, and the two chemicals would combine, have a chemical reaction, which would in turn ignite the gunpowder inside the barrel, and up it goes.
Now, Kim, with the keg, uh, and we know the technology back then with doing wood, how were they able to keep that powder dry?
They tarred it. They wiped it down with turpentine and tar. That's why so many of them you see. If you actually look up old photographs of existing antiques, you'll see they're all black because they've been tarred for waterproofing. They also came out with an electric torpedo. I think you've got a photograph or a picture of that as well. Yep. There's one. You can see the electric wires coming down from the top, anchored at the bottom to the bottom of the river or the harbor. The wires are coming down from the top into the gunpowder, black powder, and the wires were rubberized, something called gutta percha was early form of rubber. And the wire would run along shore, and there'd be a couple of sailors there, the torpedo service, that would be monitoring traffic in the stream, the river, the harbor. And when an enemy vessel got close enough, they would detonate it remotely with an electric current. There was actually, I read an account of where a ship went over one of these, and it did not blow up. And the Confederates thought that treachery was afoot. So they grabbed these two sailors and they were going to try them for treason when further investigation found that a wagon had rolled over the wires and severed the wires. So it was beginnings of the new technology, and there was still a lot to be learned.
Hey Kim, what type of mines were used when the Battle of Mobile Bay, when Admiral Farragut uttered his famous words about "damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead"? Were they all similar, or were they different types of mines?
I think there was quite a few keg torpedoes, and the reason why he said that, he knew, or he suspected, strongly suspected, that the torpedoes had been in the water for quite some time and they were probably waterlogged. They waterproofed them with the tar, but it wasn't indefinite. They would wear over time, and he felt that they'd been in long enough that he was willing to take the risk. Some ships actually hit them and blew up, but Admiral Farragut's ship did not blow up, and they were able to make the pass in Mobile Bay.
And my dear friend Kim there, he created the Gaines torpedo and had it at several events and everything. Beautiful replica that looked like the real thing, and he his own design. I mean, I would say probably if you went and sold it, probably $300 to $400. I mean, it was an exact replica, made exactly to how it's supposed to be made, and he took it up to Elm Springs and donated it in the name of George W. Thomas, the camp. You know, which I dearly appreciate. You know, that's what he does for our camp. You know, people sit there, you know, they pay their dues and they sit around and, you know, well, how come you aren't doing this, that, and the other? You know, people like Kim, you know, go out of the way to make it happen. And that's one of the things I admire about him, is that he gives so much to the SCV.
Oh yeah. Hey Kim, how does the drift torpedo work?
Well, that one right there, you'll see that it's got a torpedo anchored to the bottom, just like the others. And then
Okay.
it has these strings, ropes tied to some driftwood that's just floating on the surface. And any ship going upriver sees the debris, the floating branches, floating logs, and he doesn't think much of it until he bumps into one and pulls that cord, or gets that cord caught in his propeller, and it pulls that detonator tight, and off he goes.
Yeah, about
Okay.
basically like pull my finger.
Yeah. The Confederates actually came up with some pretty clever stuff when the siege of Petersburg was going on in Virginia. The Union forces had all their supply ships at a place called City Point. A lot of ships, a lot of warehouses, a lot of stevedores, a lot of supplies, and two Confederates walked up there in civilian clothing with what they called a clock torpedo. It looked like a clock, but there was an explosive inside set to go off at a predetermined time when the long hand passes a certain point. And they walked down to the dock, and a Union sentry says, "Halt. Who are you guys?" And they said, "We were told we had to go and put this on board General Grant's ship." And the guard says, "Well, give it to me. I'll do it." So he took it and put it on the ship. And it went off, but no one, few people were killed. The general was not killed. Warehouse was destroyed. Some ships were damaged. Some stevedores were killed, but it wreaked havoc. Pretty clever design.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke about the 290 Foundation in my travels on the World Wide Web, I came across it, and they have a entire listing of all the Confederate ships, and they have Union ships too, but they're Confederate ships. I was looking through there, and I couldn't find the CSS Spray on there, and so I contacted them and sent the information I had about the Spray to Ian Dewar, who's the president of the 290 Foundation. It's a great site, and I was on there the other day, reading their newsletters and everything, and I happened to look at the ambassadors. These are people that make donations to the 290 Foundation and everything and stuff to help them in their quest to keep history alive. And the 290 Foundation started out in Liverpool, England. And Ewan Dewar, he's very emotional about the Confederate Navy because of the Alabama was built there, and several other ships were built there in Laird's shipyard, for the Confederacy. And when I was looking through their ambassadors, people that are members there, besides myself, one of them is Kurt Fields, who portrays General Grant, and he's a friend of mine online and everything, and yeah, very impressive gentleman. And but they have members all over the world that are members of the 290 Foundation, and one of the gentlemen is in the Azores, and in the Azore Islands they have had a plaque monument to Raphael Sims and the CSS Alabama when they came there to provision the ship and everything to start their journey to make Abraham Lincoln upset. And that plaque was taken down, and they immediately sit there and try to get them to put it back up. And the 290 Foundation set up a petition and had everybody signing it and stuff to get the plaque restored back where it's supposed to be, because it was of historical significance. And Raphael Sims is just awesome.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, because the place I enjoy going. The place got renamed. It used to be the Confederate Naval Museum. Now it's called Port Columbus.
Oh yeah,
In Columbus, Georgia.
it's on my bucket list.
It's a fascinating place to go see. If you're over there by if you're near Fort Benny, it's literally Fort Benny's here in Port Columbus. I mean, it's right on the edge of the fort grounds.
Hey, Sean, you've got a photograph up there of or drawing of Admiral Raphael Sims. I got a short anecdote for you about the Alabama.
Go ahead.
They were cruising all over the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, but near the end, they were back in the Atlantic, and they actually had captured a commercial vessel called the Tonawanda. I believe it was out of Philadelphia, and since it was a commercial vessel, they were well within international law to confiscate all property on board. There was a family there, I believe they were from Delaware. They had a slave, a 16-year-old slave by the name of David White. And in those days, slaves were property. So Raphael Sims took young David White aside, and he gave him an alternative of three choices. He says, I cannot sail for very long with all these civilian prisoners on board. I will have to put them ashore somewhere. Now, when I put them ashore at the first port I come to, you may get off with them if you wish and stay a slave to your master. Your second choice is remain on board. The second port I come to, I will put you off there, and you will be a free man, but you'll be on your own. The third choice is you stay on board and become part of my crew. David White chose to remain as part of the crew of the ship that gave him his freedom. He actually died at Cherbourg when the ship went down.
Damn. See, I love hearing those stories, especially, of blacks, Hispanics, all that, how they started out one thing and they done something, or came of something because of the war. Like him, Nelson Webb Bush's ancestor, that became a reverend uh, in the Army of Tennessee. First black man became a reverend for a white army, per
Yeah.
se.
Yeah, there's another gentleman by the name of Moses Dallas. When Harvey Burney got killed by the Black Panthers out there in Mississippi at that rally, him and his uh, significant other, this lady, uh, they got ran off the road by the Black Panthers and stuff. The car rolled over and he was killed. She survived and everything, and it was. Uh, so I started trying to find somewhere to do a dossier about a Black Confederate soldier and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went online, I suggested, like, why am I doing soldier? We'll do sailor. And I found Moses Dallas, who was a river pilot on the Savannah River, and he was one of the best river pilots there was. He was a slave that was basically loaned to the Confederate Navy by the woman that owned him, who was also a lady of color that owned him and stuff, because he was a river pilot. He knew the Savannah River back and forth, and he was so proficient that Secretary Mallory increased his rate of pay to $80 a month. And when him and Lieutenant Peridot and a group of black sailors, they sit there and took on the Water Witch, which was there at Port Columbus for a while as a mock-up. And they boarded the ship to try to take it. And the paymaster from the Water Witch sounded a battle rattle. And when everybody came on deck, a battle ensued, the deck plates, and Lieutenant Peridot and Moses Dallas were killed instantaneously. And they captured the ship, and then the ship was captured again. It was a mail ship. It was captured again by the Union, but they successfully landed, and basically it was an all black crew, more or less. Lieutenant Peridot was a white guy. But they captured the Water Witch and everything. So there's a lot of people of color, blacks or whatever, that fought in there. And Harvey Burney had a list of over 200,000 black soldiers that fought for the Confederacy.
Mm-hmm.
Not as slaves, but as bodyguards, as attendants, and actually fought in combat with muskets.
Yep.
Which was pretty amazing. Everybody's like, and it was a multicultural war. It wasn't just black and white. Stan Wadey was the last general to surrender in the war stuff. And he was a Cherokee Indian from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing the evolution of all that. But as you can imagine, this guy was a slave, but he was also a naval officer as a pilot for the Savannah.
You look like you got something on your mind, Kim.
Oh, go ahead, Kim. Sorry.
Jim was just saying something about the multiculturalism of it. Well, the crews were made up of anybody and everybody. I think the Alabama had a couple of Prussians on board, a lot of Caribbeans, a lot of English, a lot of Irish. But he just reminded me that of the blockade runners that were running in and out of the South, there was two that were actually operated from Cuba. One was the Monticello, and all of a sudden the name of the second one escapes me. But I thought that was curious that Cuba is getting in on the act.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Well,
running blockades was profitable.
well, yeah. I mean, Cuba was part of it because in my area with the cow cavalry, a lot of the cattlemen would take their cattle, uh, which is now called Fort Myers Beach area.
Yeah,
Uh,
Ponta Rasa.
yeah, Ponderosa, load them up on ships and send their cattle to Cuba.
The Florida Division actually has an SCV camp in Kissimmee named
Yes.
after Jacob Summerlin. Well, he was a cattleman, but a lot of people don't know that he was also a blockade runner or ran a blockade runner.
Oh,
He was
okay.
running cattle to Cuba.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew about his cattle business, but I didn't know about him owning and operating a blockade runner.
I think he ran it out of Tampa.
Yeah. There, yeah, because going up to this past reunion, me and my camp members, we stopped in at Gamble's mansion. And they were talking about the blockade runners there.
Oh, yeah.
That's where Judah Benjamin left the state. He left out of Gamble Mansion and escaped apprehension and arrest through Gamble Plantation. And John Breckenridge went out the Atlantic side, all the way to Cuba.
All right.
That was an incredible trip that Kim came up with for us to do the recreation of Breckenridge's escape, and it was a great honor to be a part of it.
It sounded like fun.
Yeah, we do Confederate Memorial Day. We go from Sebastian down to West Palm. We go to Okeechobee the weekend prior and do all the graves over there. So fire a volley and read their names. And then we go from Sebastian down to West Palm Beach, and the 14th Brigade comes from Miami North with Jimmy Shirley and David Nash and all of them. And but one of my favorites we do is right there, kitty corner from George Thomas, is James Anderson Russell, who was Confederate Army of the 2nd Florida, and he mustered out and fell back in, and he joined the Confederate Navy because he was a fisherman all his life and everything. And a lady with the Historical Society of Fort Pierce, St. Lucie County Historical Society, pardon me, Jo Ellen Wilson, she told me that she has an entire dossier on this guy after the war. And he came back, of course, to down to Fort Pierce and stuff, and became a prominent part of society. He was a really famous game hunter, fishing guide, and everything. And he got notoriety because one day he was out on a schooner with someone. He was, some rich guy, and the guy's dog jumped off the schooner. Just all of a sudden, there was a thunderclap and a storm, and the dog jumped off the schooner into the water, got scared, and Russell kicked off his shoes, jumped in the water, and rescued the guy's dog. And they had a big thing about him all over the place. That he's such a kind-hearted man to risk his life for a dog.
Oh yeah. Well,
but he got captured and put in a POW camp in Bahamas, and he was captured on the Fortune. And one of my favorite sayings is "Fortune favors the brave." So it's really cool. We see a lot of most of these guys live to be almost 100 years old, and it's so incredible that when you come to their graves and realize that not only what they did in the war, but they came down here to Florida after the war, became members of society here, and left their legacy, like J.M. Burdines and everything. But I'm sorry.
That's all right. Kim, is there anything else you would like to talk about?
Well, let me see. Some of the characters in the Navy were just phenomenal. Okay. It makes you ask, where did we get such men? People like John C. Brain, John Yates Bell, Charles W. Reed. Reed, at the end of the war, was in command of the CSS Webb, and he had to run the gauntlet down the Mississippi River to the ocean, past several federal fleets, and he almost made it. And he got to the very end down near New Orleans, and he had to scuttle his own ship. But what courage, what chutzpah that takes to do that.
Well, gentlemen, Kim, thank you for coming on the show tonight. I know you're on vacation. I appreciate it. Jim, thank you for
Thank
coming on the show tonight.
Thank you.
Anytime. I love the whole thing you do, Sean. You're just amazing.
Hey,
Not that you are, Kim, but you're amazing too.
well,
Man's never
guys,
been in the Navy. He knows more about this Navy than I could ever think to learn.
That's why I love going to Port Columbus, because I'm always learning something new.
Yeah.
You both know how big I am. The last time I was in Port Columbus, I got to talk with the historian there. He goes, "Hey, try this jacket on." He takes it out of glass. I'm like, no, I would be honored to touch it, but not put it on. He goes, "Put it on." I'm like, "This feels kind of good and everything." He goes, "Sean, your height and your body size is the size of an average Confederate soldier back then, or sailor."
Very cool.
Lieutenant Reed was a very small man, and he had a very meek voice.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time he was left in command while the captain went ashore, the crew tried him. They refused to take orders from a midshipman. The midshipman went to Lieutenant Reed and said, "Hey, they're not following my orders." So Lieutenant Reed arms himself with a pistol and his cutlass. And when the captain returned, he calls up Lieutenant Reed and says, "Why is the crew in the mast and the spars? Why are they hanging up there?" And they found out, well, they were afraid to come down because Lieutenant Reed had chased them up there with the flat of his blade. So he would rise to the occasion if needed, Pete.
Yeah. Well, yeah, guys, remember this is Hispanic month. So a lot of people don't know about this with the state of Florida. They think beaches, sunshine, all this stuff, but a lot of people don't realize the history of Florida goes back to the 1500s. St. Augustine, Florida was founded in the 1565. Here's the kicker, especially for Hispanic History Month, was founded by Spain.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of Spanish culture in the South besides European as well. You get over to Louisiana, you get more a little bit more French because you got the French Creoles.
Oh yeah.
I believe when the British were trying to come into the South during the Revolutionary War, they were trying to come through Florida, and Spain gave them some fits. They couldn't get in. So they saved the colonies a southern front.
Yeah, Kim does. He always comes up with some great, wonderful events for us to do, and it was a privilege and an honor to be with him at the bicentennial of the adoption of Florida from Spain up in St. Augustine. We went up there, and when I first got there, he came the next day. When I first got there Friday night, most of the people that I met were historians and professors, and I felt so out of place. I was like, I'm like the little guy here. and soon found out that they just welcomed me in like I was one of them. And we got to meet the Saga crew, which are stunt people and stuff. They're young people that do stunts for Ren fairs and everything else, and they pride themselves on doing that. But another thing is that I do Seminole War reenacting in Florida, which is the Florida Wars. One of the cool things that we started doing together is the Battle of Loxahatchee in our school, the sailor at Loxahatchee we did.
Mm-hmm.
The first battle of Loxahatchee, though, was the battle, Powell's battle, which is Levin Powell, who wrote a book called Swamp Sailor, which Kim showed up at one of our events and stuff that I was doing for Pioneer Day for our state park down here. And he showed up as an 1830s swamp sailor with his hat. He got a jumper, and he sewed a denim flap on the back of it, the jack tar flap, and embroidered the sleeves and everything and stuff. And he says, "Oh yeah, I did this the night before I came." And so the historical speaker didn't show up. So I was like, "Hey, you want to do something as a talk about the swamp sailor?" And he's like, sure. So put him on a spot. He came through like unbelievable. And we had such a great time. And, but Levin Powell was on the revenue cutter Washington, and Raphael Sims as a midshipman was on the revenue cutter Washington. And Levin Powell at the Battle of Loxahatchee, one of the saving graces was he had a man in his company there, Joseph Johnston, that had went to the academy and was a chartographer, and he turned the artillery piece around and allowed them to get back to their boats and come back up to Fort Pierce and report in. But Levin Powell, during the Civil War, war between the states, was actually a Commodore up there in Charleston. And I was like, most of the guys that were officers that fought in the Mexican-American War and the Civil War, like Thomas Jackson, of course, being right out of West Point, ended up, coming into the war between the states as officers in command. And they cut their teeth in a lot of the tactics they learned. And of course, my hometown, we have, William Tecumseh Sherman that was stationed there right out of West Point in Fort Pierce. You can't pick your teams. I'm sorry.
Well, we've been going at this for about an hour and a half. You guys need a break, or Kim? I know you're on vacation.
Yeah, Miss Debbie's going to skin him alive.
Most likely.
I'm doing all right.
All righty. Well, this call it a night, guys. It's been a great show. Great time hanging out with you two. Maybe I could get you guys back on at a later date, and we could sit down and talk about the CSS Florida.
Sure.
Oh yeah. Excellent, sir.
Yeah.
Also, just to put in a plug for Mr. Kim, another event that we're doing is the 160th anniversary. Mr. Kim, you want to tell them about that?
It's 160th anniversary of the commissioning of the ironclad CSS Neuse, Neuse, up in North Carolina. They've got a museum up there with a recreation of the ironclad, but in a lot in the back behind the museum, they have a full-scale 1-to-1 ratio ironclad, and we're going to be sleeping on board and doing basically a school of the 19th century sailor up there.
Ooh.
So if you don't see me for a while, I might be up in Neuse, North Carolina, moving up there to be a permanent crew member. I am so psyched about this.
Oh,
I sent you a picture of that too, Sean, if you want to put up the Neuse.
The Neuse.
Yeah, it looks like an ironclad.
They have lots of YouTube videos on the Neuse too. I've been watching, and it's incredible. One guy said that when the Neuse was still in the river as a kid, they used to swim off of it, dive off of it, guys went down there diving and went underneath it, and there she is. Isn't that beautiful? Oh my God, I'm just like
it almost, the way it's designed and all that, it almost looks like the Virginia, so to speak.
yeah.
Yeah, there's some drawings before or after this photo also.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she was similar to the Arbomile too. The Arbomile was also ironclad. There's
A lot of the Confederate ironclads were casemate ironclads that looked like a barn roof floating on the water.
Okay.
But the Noose and the Arbomile look more streamlined, like Star Trek.
Yeah, yeah. I got your picture on the news, but I don't have anything.
I thought I had some drawings, actually paintings of 1860 when they were building it in the river.
Oh, I think I found it.
It's named after the Neuse River that's right near Kinston, North Carolina. That's the museum itself.
Yeah.
Okay. At least I'm on the right track.
Yeah, there it is.
Oh, that is awesome. Look at that. I'll take it.
That's the mock-up inside the museum.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, what pound cannon would fit in there, Kim?
I don't remember exactly.
Wasn't it a 24-pound Brooks cannon?
The Brook was one of the best naval cannons there was, but they weren't in use as much. The Navy was kind of scrounging for what they could get.
Yeah.
The Brooks rifle was the best cannon probably of the whole war, but quite often they had to use whatever they had.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what was on this particular vessel.
There's I think there's 6 battle ports that slide open, and the forward gun and the aft gun. There's only 2 guns, and they were swivel guns, so they could basically swivel out the ports. They could open the ports and fire and bring it back in the battery, then swing over, fire straight ahead, back and forth. But that's the pilot house view right there. I'm just I can't wait to get there. It's like, can you imagine having that in the backyard as a kid? Be over there every day. Don't want me to sweep the decks for you? That's incredible. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's a painting hanging inside the museum.
Oh, kidding. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, he's already been there.
I'm sure he has. Victor asked a question, Kim. When is that event, and how do you get involved?
I believe it's October 7th and 8th and 9th.
Yeah.
And I believe you can go on Facebook and search for CSS Noose, NEUSEII, Noose 2.
Yeah.
And they'll have a Facebook page, and you can, inquire about participating or spectating or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome. I mean, it's gonna be a blowout.
They're going to be having cutlass drill and marlin spike seamanship and musket drill, cannon drill. So it'll be a regular school of the 19th century.
Yeah, it's going to be ran just like being on board ship, the plan of the day and the whole 9 yards. And I'm like, yes.
Very similar to the school of the 19th century that Jim and I put on every year down in St. Cloud at Narcoossee in March.
Yeah, it looks like wings over their news is February. This past weekend.
Yeah, they have ongoing programs all the time, and they have revolving stuff. They had a YouTube video where they're showing the archive room. It looks like a bank vault, and the guy from Civil War Trust was on there. I can't remember his name.
Oh, yeah.
And he was on there and stuff, and the guy's showing him artifacts from the noose. When they recovered the noose out of the river and built the building and put it there, there was over 1,000 artifacts they found in the river at the same time. And
Damn.
one that I love is the sponge bucket for one of the cannons. And I was like, wow, I need one of those for my cannon because ours bottom's rusted out on. But I'm very chomping at the bits, ready to get there.
Guys, I found that Facebook page that Kim and Jim is talking about. I am currently uploading it to Look Around Southwest Florida page right now.
Thank you.
Yep. Ready. Let's call it a night. It's been a great show. Hope everybody had fun and learned something about the Navy. From the Revolution War all the way to our ancestors in the Confederacy.
And we're actively recruiting crews too. Anybody wants to sign up? We're taking our show on the road for the School of the Sailor. You know, we have a ship that we actually host, and we're planning to do a Sea Cadet School of the Sailor in Loxahatchee for Seminole War for the USS Dale, which was a federal ship during the Seminole Wars in commission. And we set it up, and it was really cool because even though the cadets got canceled because a couple of them came out with COVID, we had about 200 people, spectators, that just showed up into the park. It's an environmental park. They jog, they run, and they just show up, and we had some really cool people come on board, you know, and get involved with the Loxahatchee battlefield. And they're quite amazed at our ship. I piked people across the quarterdeck, and Kim Sitter was our port gunnery and stuff, and fired the cannon at the pirate ships and everything, and the others that came up there and tried to attack us. And it came out really, really cool. And Kim and Talisa and I can't remember the kid's name. Oh, Nathaniel.
Yes.
Nathaniel Johnson, he was with us and stuff. But the event was just perfect. Every event we do is
Gentlemen and ladies, if you're looking into getting into a Confederate Navy reenacting, hit up Jim Odell or Kim Cullars. They'll be happy to teach you and kind of guide you in doing that type of reenactment. So with that being said, let me play this video. Kind of, wait, I had it. Yeah. Play this video. I know Linda Hudson likes this video, so this be a shout out to her and Roy. Other than that, stay Southern, my friends. Feel free to send messages, email me. If you have any events coming up with your camp, your brigade, if you have any news, something excitement coming up, feel free to hit me up, and then I'll bring you on the show. We talk about your event. Other than that, Jim,
one more
go
thing,
ahead, Jim.
scvpalmbeach.com, I believe it is, the James Patton Anderson camp. Warren Collett and Peter Johnson have posted onto their camp site. They have a bunch of uniforms and stuff for Confederate and a lot of lady stuff that they're selling on there, along with battle flags and the whole 9 yards. They have an ongoing program where they sell all sorts of stuff.
Cool. All right. Thank you for coming on tonight, guys. With that being said, stay Southern. Don't let the liberals grind you down. Stay positive.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Cam.
Seeing both of you. And feel free to hit me up at any time if you have any events or anything coming up.
Night, Mary Ellen. Night, John.
Please.
Stay Southern. Jim, I'll get you a copy of the YouTube video so you can send it throughout your camp.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
All
Awesome.
right. Thank you. Have a good night. Where's I think this is.
When my mother was in college, she danced with Confederate veterans. To me, it wasn't that far away. My father knew this. My mother knew this. Almost 50 years ago, I joined the Sons of Confederate Veterans. In those days, we weren't concerned about saving monuments or any of those things. That wasn't necessary. In fact, none of us had any remote idea that it would ever come up, or we would have done something then. We can't just sit there and react. We have to be proactive.
The Sons of Confederate Veterans is the direct heir of the United Confederate Veterans and the oldest hereditary organization for male descendants of Confederate soldiers. Organized at Richmond, Virginia in 1896, the SCV continues to serve as a historical, patriotic, and non-political organization dedicated to ensuring that a true history of the 1861 to 1865 period is preserved. Membership in the SCV is open to all male descendants of any veteran who served honorably in the Confederate Armed Forces.
It is my birthright. My ancestors fought and bled and died. Because of their sacrifice, it gives me not only the eligibility to join, but it's my duty to join the organization. Their blood flows through my veins. Their struggles and triumphs are what made my family what it was, and in a sense made me who I am today. We're to defend the Confederate soldier's good name, that he fought for a noble cause, that he fought for his home, his wife, his children, and his descendants. We're to guard his history, which to me, it's the monuments, it's the headstones, as well as the actual written history of what happened during that war.
The citizen soldiers who fought for the Confederacy personified the best qualities of America. The preservation of liberty and freedom was the motivating factor in the South's decision to fight the Second American Revolution. The tenacity with which the Confederate soldiers fought underscored their belief in the rights guaranteed by the Constitution. These attributes are the underpinning of our democratic society and represent the foundation on which this nation was built. Today, the Sons of Confederate Veterans is preserving the history and legacy of these heroes, so future generations can understand the motives that gave life to the Southern cause.
We need to draw the line in the sand right now. These are our Confederate monuments. These are our Southern heroes, and you're not going to take them down. Right now, if we do not protect our heritage and present it as it truly was, it's going to be lost forever.
The memory and reputation of the Confederate soldier, as well as the motives for his suffering and sacrifice, are being purposely distorted in an attempt to alter history. And unless the descendants of Southern soldiers resist those efforts, a unique part of our nation's cultural heritage will cease to exist.
My commitment to the SCV is a commitment to our heritage, our cause, not in a violent way nor an aggressive way, simply in the way we live. Live what you believe, but in your defense, know in what you're defending and defend it truthfully.
If you were interested in perpetuating the ideals that motivated your Confederate ancestor, the SCV needs you. Simply visit www.scv.org today. Our genealogists are ready to help you trace your Confederate heritage.
We're not just some history club. We are a fraternal organization who is essentially the last guardians whose duty it is to defend American and Southern history.
Oh, Sorry. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you learned something.